Welcome to another episode of Life Stories. Today, we share a powerful and emotional journey of a woman who, after years of living in the shadows of her family's expectations, finally steps into the light of her own self-worth. A wedding, a painful confrontation, and a lifetime of trying to prove herself lead to a moment of profound realization. Join us as we explore themes of family, love, resilience, and the courage to embrace your true self. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. I wasn't sure what possessed me to attend the wedding. Perhaps it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the chance to see my sister, Megan, one last time in that setting, even though we had barely spoken in the last decade. But there I was, in a beautiful gown, standing in the grand ballroom of an upscale hotel, watching as the guests poured in, their laughter and chatter filling the air. I wasn't exactly part of the wedding party, but my husband Ben, with his easygoing charm and warmth, had been invited as a guest. And of course, as his wife, I was brought along. Megan, my younger sister by 7 years, was the center of attention. From what I gathered, this wedding wasn't really about me. It was more about the connections, the status, and the reputation it would bring to her. I had always known that Megan was the golden child of our family, the perfect daughter. The one who always had everything handed to her on a silver platter. The place was grand. It was the kind of venue you see in movies, ornate chandeliers, luxurious seating, and an ambience that whispered money and exclusivity. Ben was mingling with the other guests, greeting people he knew from his own circle. While I quietly stepped away, I found myself excusing my absence with a brief smile and heading towards the restroom. The mirrors reflected my face as I freshened up, applying a hint of lipstick and brushing my hair. The truth was, I didn't need to be here. I hadn't felt like I was part of this family in years. The coldness in their eyes, the lack of genuine connection, this wasn't the kind of family you'd wish to be a part of. I had long since learned that lesson. But today, I had come for one reason: closure. When I returned from the restroom, my path crossed with a group of guests standing near the entrance. As I made my way back to the ceremony, I overheard a voice loud enough for me to hear, but not quite direct. "Oh, look at that defective person. Why is she even here?" the voice remarked, dripping with mockery. I froze mid-step. A chill ran down my spine as I looked around, trying to identify the source of the venomous words. The comments continued, barely masked in the noise of the room. Why were they saying these things? My mind raced as I tried to understand. It wasn't just gossip. It felt intentional. Like they knew I would hear. Like they wanted me to hear. My heart clenched. The harshness in their words brought back memories of my childhood. The words my parents had always said about me: defective, unworthy, ugly. It was nothing new. But hearing it now, in this setting, at my sister's wedding, it hit me harder than I anticipated. I walked on, refusing to let them have the satisfaction of seeing my discomfort. But before I could take another step, a voice called out again, louder this time. "Hey, ugly, can't you hear me?" The words stung, and I felt the anger bubble up inside me. But I kept my head down and kept walking. I wouldn't let them get to me. Not today. Suddenly, I felt someone grab my arm. The force was sharp and painful, and I flinched in surprise. I turned around, a rush of adrenaline filling my body. "Wait a minute. I'm talking to you," a woman's voice snapped at me. Her hand gripped my arm tighter, almost as if she expected me to respond, to explain myself. I jerked my arm away, and she stumbled back dramatically. It was all so ridiculous. Another woman appeared beside her, rushing over with concern. "Lauren, are you okay? Why are you being so rough?" she asked, her tone full of false concern, a sharp contrast to her earlier hostility. I blinked at her, confused and stunned. The last thing I expected was for her to call me rough. I had been simply trying to walk away. to avoid further confrontation. But now the situation was escalating far beyond my control. "What's going on? Who are you?" I asked, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions that had suddenly gripped me. Lauren, the woman who had grabbed my arm, glared at me, her face twisted into something almost unrecognizable. She sneered and said, "You really don't remember me? How rude. Don't you even recognize your own sister?" Sister. My heart dropped into my stomach. The words rang in my ears, but they didn't seem to match the person standing before me. "Lauren," I muttered under my breath. "Lauren." She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow, clearly expecting some kind of reaction from me. It didn't come. I wasn't sure who she thought she was, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of playing along. And then it hit me, the woman standing before me wasn't just anyone. She was my sister. Megan's older, much more self-righteous sister. Lauren. The one who always seemed to have it all. The one who never let anyone forget that she was the better one. The more accomplished one. "And this is our mother," Lauren said, now pointing to the woman who stood behind her. Frowning, she looked at me with the same disdain that had colored my childhood. I couldn't recognize the woman who had once been my mother. The woman who had given birth to me, but now seemed so distant, so foreign. I looked at my sister, and for the first time in years, I saw her clearly not as the girl who had everything I wanted, but as someone who had, in her own way, suffered just as much as I had. I wasn't sure why I had come, or what I was hoping for, but this moment right here, with Lauren and my mother standing in front of me, casting their cruel judgment, was the last moment I needed to finally let go. To finally close the door that had been cracked open for far too long. The scene in front of me was unreal. I was standing there, frozen in place, my mind racing as my sister and mother continued to glare at me, their eyes filled with contempt. It was as if all the years of animosity had led to this moment. This confrontation at the most inopportune time. My sister Lauren's face was flushed with anger, her hand still hovering where it had grabbed my arm earlier, as if daring me to challenge her. "Why are you even here?" Lauren spat out, her voice laced with venom. "You don't belong here. You never have." Her words echoed in my ears, each one a sharp reminder of the years I had spent in the shadows of her perfect life. I had always been the mistake, the defective one, the one who couldn't measure up. I had heard it all before. From her. From my parents. But hearing it now, in front of strangers, at my sister's wedding, hit me harder than I could have imagined. I had spent so many years trying to let go of the pain, to move on from the cruelty, but here it was, standing before me, like an open wound I could never quite heal. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, silently, taking in the situation, the hurt, the anger, the disappointment. What was I supposed to say? Was I supposed to beg for forgiveness? Apologize for existing? For being the person my parents never wanted me to be? Just then, a voice cut through the tension, calming the storm for a moment. Ben, my husband, appeared at my side, his presence a quiet strength. He had been looking for me, no doubt sensing the unease in the air. When he saw the scene unfolding, his expression hardened, his protective instincts kicking in. "Rachel, there you are," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying concern. "What's going on here?" I gave him a small smile, though I could feel my chest tightening. "I got caught up with some strange people on my way back," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I was feeling inside. I moved closer to him, seeking the comfort and safety of his presence. Ben looked at me with understanding, his eyes narrowing as he took in the situation. He had met my family only a few times before, and even then, there had always been an unspoken tension. He knew about the years of neglect and mistreatment, and though he had never voiced it, I could tell he didn't understand how I had endured it for so long. But today, this was no longer about me. This was about standing by my side and showing my family that I wasn't alone anymore. Lauren's face twisted with fury when she saw me standing next to Ben. The look she gave me was one of pure hatred. As if my mere existence was an affront to everything she had worked for. She didn't like the idea that I could have something she didn't. Something real. Something genuine. And she hated it even more that Ben, someone she had no claim over, stood beside me, offering his quiet support. Mr. Harris. Noah. My sister's husband. Said. His voice unsteady. He had been standing there, observing the scene with a mixture of shock and confusion. I'm really sorry for what my wife said. It's inappropriate. We shouldn't have let it go this far. I could see the discomfort in Noah's eyes as he fumbled with his words, trying to smooth over the situation. He didn't know what to make of it all. But his attempt at an apology only seemed to inflame Lauren even more. What do you mean? Sorry. Lauren snapped, her voice rising. She's the one who should apologize. She's the one who crashed our wedding and ruined everything. She pointed at me, her finger shaking with accusation. I couldn't help but feel the sting of her words. She had always been the center of attention. The perfect one. And here she was, lashing out at me, trying to make me the villain in this story, as if somehow everything was my fault. But I wasn't going to play her game. I wasn't going to apologize for simply being who I was. For showing up to the event. For trying to make peace with the past. Ben's grip on my hand tightened. And I could feel his anger rising as well. Lauren. That's enough, he said firmly. His tone sharp. You've said enough. We're not here to cause trouble. But we're also not going to stand here and let you disrespect my wife. The silence that followed was heavy. The tension was palpable. My parents, who had been standing on the sidelines, watching the exchange unfold, seemed frozen in place. My mother looked at me, her expression full of confusion, while my father's gaze was fixed on the ground, as if he couldn't bear to face the situation. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so disconnected from them, so alienated. Lauren, however, wasn't finished. She had to get the last word in, to make sure everyone knew just how much she despised me, how much she resented my existence. You've always been a failure, Emily, she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. And you always will be. It's amazing you even have the nerve to show up here. I felt the tears welling up inside me, but I held them back. I wasn't going to cry in front of them. Not today. Not when I had already done so much to build a life for myself. A life they could never understand. Ben stepped in front of me, blocking my sister's gaze. He wasn't going to let her continue. We're done here, he said firmly. You've said your piece. And we're leaving. I glanced at Ben, his back to my family, standing as a shield between me and the people who had caused me so much pain. It was strange. But in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in years. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had found my own worth. And nothing they said could take that away from me. I turned to Ben and smiled softly, my heart swelling with love for him. Let's go home, I whispered. We've done enough here. And together, we walked away, leaving behind the family I had once known. We left the wedding in silence, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the grand hallway as we made our way toward the exit. Ben didn't ask me questions. He didn't need to. He understood. His presence was enough. A silent assurance that I wasn't alone. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I felt the weight of everything I had just endured beginning to settle over me. My heart was heavy, but not in the way it had been before. This time, there was no anger, no bitterness. There was only a quiet, undeniable sense of relief. I had walked away from that scene without looking back, without apologizing, without trying to make sense of what had happened. And yet, as we drove back home, the memories continued to replay in my mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. I couldn't help but reflect on the years that had led me to this point. The way my family had shaped me. The way I had been forced to fight for every inch of my existence. Ben glanced over at me as we stopped at a red light. His expression soft. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice laced with concern. I nodded. My throat tight. "I'm fine. Just exhausted." He reached over. His hand finding mine. "You don't have to explain everything. You know. I'm here for you. Emily." I squeezed his hand. Grateful for his understanding. We didn't need to talk about the years of pain. The insults. The endless struggle to prove myself to people who would never see me for who I really was. Ben had always known about my past. But I hadn't shared all the details with him. I hadn't wanted to burden him with it. But tonight, I realized that maybe it was time. Maybe it was time for me to fully open up and tell him everything, the good and the bad. The triumphs and the scars. When we arrived home, I didn't immediately head inside. Instead, I stood in the driveway for a few moments, letting the cool night air wash over me. It was quiet. Peaceful even. There was a sense of finality in the air. As if the day had brought some kind of closure. I felt as if I had been holding my breath for years. And now, finally, I could exhale. Ben came up behind me, wrapping his arms around me. "Let's go inside," he whispered. "You need some rest." I didn't resist. His embrace was comforting. And for the first time in a long while, I felt safe. I followed him inside. My mind still racing with thoughts of my family, of my sister, of the years I had spent trying to live up to expectations that were never meant for me. The cruel words, the judgment, they all still stung. But now they felt distant, almost irrelevant. After we settled in, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, the dim light casting soft shadows around the room. Ben sat across from me, waiting for me to speak. I knew he wouldn't push, but the silence between us felt heavy, as if there were unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, I took a deep breath and began. "I've been running from my past for so long, Ben. I've spent years pretending it didn't matter, pretending that their words didn't hurt. But it's been eating me up inside." Ben's eyes were filled with compassion, his gaze never wavering as he listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just let me speak. And for the first time in ages, I felt like someone truly understood. I was never good enough for them. I continued, my voice faltering. "My parents always favored Megan. She was the pretty one. The one who could do no wrong. I was always just the shadow. The one they never really cared about. They made me feel like I was defective. Like I wasn't worthy of love or respect." I paused, taking a deep breath. It wasn't just them, though. It was Lauren too. She followed their example. Always mocking me. Always trying to prove she was better than me. It was as if she needed to see me fail in order to feel better about herself. Ben reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "That's awful. Emily. I'm so sorry you had to go through that." I nodded, grateful for his words. But they couldn't undo the years of pain. They couldn't change the fact that my parents had never cared about me. Not in the way I needed. I tried so hard to make them love me. To make them proud. I whispered. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Ben squeezed my hand, his thumb gently brushing over my knuckles. "You're enough. Emily. You're more than enough." His words were a balm to my soul. But the scars ran deep. I had spent so long feeling like I wasn't worthy of anything. But Ben had never seen me that way. He saw me for who I truly was. And for the first time in my life, I began to believe it too. It wasn't just about my parents. I said quietly. It was about me, too. I had to prove to myself that I was capable. That I could make something of my life. Even if they didn't believe in me. And I did. I built a life. Ben. I built this life we have now. And it's real. It's mine. Ben smiled, his eyes softening with affection. "And you should be proud of everything you've accomplished. You've built something incredible. Emily." You've overcome so much. I looked at him, feeling a swell of love and gratitude in my chest. I couldn't have done it without you. I whispered. You've been my strength when I didn't have any. Ben leaned forward, his forehead gently resting against mine. And I always will be. We're in this together, Emily. Always. In that moment, as I sat there with Ben, I realized that I had finally found something I had been searching for my whole life: unconditional love. Not from my family, not from my sister, but from the person who had always believed in me. And that belief, that love, was enough. It was everything. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The confrontation at the wedding, the painful memories, the harsh words that had been thrown at me, all of it seemed distant now. With every passing day, I felt lighter, more at peace with who I had become and the life I had built. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove something to people who would never see me for who I truly was. But now, I understood that the only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. And as I looked at Ben, my husband, and our life together, I knew I had finally found the love and acceptance I had always longed for. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. What mattered was the family I had chosen, the life I had built with Ben, and the person I had become. Life wasn't easy, and the journey was far from over. But I was no longer afraid of the future. I was no longer burdened by the weight of the past. I had let go, and in doing so, I had found freedom. I had learned that real strength didn't come from fighting to be seen by others, it came from embracing who I was, flaws and all, and trusting that I was enough. So, as we moved forward, I knew that my story wasn't defined by the cruelty of my past, but by the love and resilience I carried within me. And for the first time in my life, I could finally say that I was proud of the woman I had become. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more life stories that explore the trials and triumphs we all face, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more.